Picking up where we left off with our room, window, and door labels, we're now going to dimension our cottage. When we dimension our cottage, we need to tell where the doors and windows, and even walls, are in relation to the exterior sides of our building. We're going to dimension this bottom wall first. We're going to start on the left endpoint, go to the midpoint of our door, midpoints of all three windows, and then over to the far side of our wall. I don't have a dimension layer just yet. We need to put one of them in. So we'll create a brand new layer and call this one dimensions. For our dimension layer, we're going to make that color red. Make sure it's the active layer, and we'll find all of our dimensioning tools on the Annotate tab. It's a lot easier to draw this one if you have OSnap, OTrack, and Polar turned on. If you start your dimension tool, you can choose the endpoint of this wall, and because we drew in a line, we can go to the midpoint of this window. Well, currently, this number here, 32.000, means nothing to me other than it's 32 inches apart, but it's really not an architectural dimension. We want to set our architectural style similar to how we set up our text style on our Properties tab. Right above text style, you'll find the dimension style, and it was currently set on a decimal standard. That's going to be for your mechanical type drawings. We want to go to Architectural 6. 6 has a nice text height that we can read. It'll be the same height as our living, sleeping, bath, and closet. And it will also give us the architectural ticks instead of the mechanical arrows. Again, click on the dimension button, endpoint, midpoint, and now that 32 is now written as, instead of 32 inches, the foot and inch equivalent of 2 feet 8 inches. Placing it away from my building, I need to be able to keep a standard spacing. Kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I can tell you that it's 2 feet 8 if it's way down here, but that's way too far. I can tell you that that distance is 2 feet 8 up here, but it's way too close. I would be running into this A when I dimension my other values. I want it right about here to where it's just right. And what I've found is spacing it 27 inches away from this building places it just right. For me to get a reference point that's 27 inches away, I'm going to offset this wall down by 27. So now I have a nice location I can just go click. So again, annotate dimension, endpoint to midpoint, and now go select that line. That 2 feet 8 is now spaced far enough away from my building that I can read it, and that I have a nice gap between the 2 foot 8 and my A's when I bring out my other dimensions. What we're going to be doing is getting rid of that reference line though. I don't want it anymore. You could, I highly suggest to not do it, you could dimension from this midpoint to this midpoint and choose the endpoint of our dimension and try to get your other string of dimensions by doing them individually. There's a much easier tool called the Continue tool on the Dimension command. If you start the Dimension command, on our options, choose Continue, you can select the vertical line on the right side of our dimension value, and it will bring out a string of dimensions for wherever I click. So midpoint of this window, midpoint of this window, midpoint of this window, and endpoint of our wall. When I want to end it, I can either hit Enter or Escape. I'm going to hit Enter and Escape to stop the Dimension command. What that does is it gives me a nice string of dimensions that are all at the same height, those 27 inches away from our wall. You might notice that our A's are now being covered. What I like to do is just move my A's to the left 8 inches. You'll remember that 8 value was how far I spaced the center of the circle down from the midpoint of the window. And so I choose the same exact amount 8 inches away. So I get the same spacing on the top as I do on the right. The last dimension that we want to place in on this bottom wall is going to be the overall dimension of this wall. Now I want it to be 18 more inches beyond this string of dimensions. So 27 plus 18 gives me 45. I'm going to offset this same wall down by 45 inches. What that allows me to do is dimension from the endpoint of the wall to the endpoint of the wall and place my 18-foot overall dimension at this height. Please don't forget to go delete your little reference line. Instead of me offsetting once, dimensioning, offsetting again, dimensioning, knowing those values, 18 and 27, I'm going to offset my walls before I start any of my dimensions. O, enter, select this, 27, enter. My new line, 18, enter. I'm going to do that for my top walls as well. 27 at first, 18 to follow, and even my right walls, 27 and 18. Now that quickly aids me in my dimensioning placements. I can dimension from this endpoint to our midpoint of our window and place, oh, I missed that midpoint. From the endpoint to the midpoint and place that on this value. Again, continue from this value up to our other endpoint. Enter and escape. I can then dimension from endpoint to endpoint and place it at this distance out. Don't forget those reference lines, we want to select them and delete them. Now this A, instead of moving it to the left, I'm going to move it down 8 inches. And it too will be down and to the right of my window's center. Going up top for my B, we're going to want to dimension from the endpoint to the midpoint at this height. But when I continue my dimension, I'm going to want to, something's going on. There we go. I'm going to want to continue to the left side of this wall. I didn't dimension this wall down below because I can dimension it on the right side of my building. But this interior wall doesn't extend down to my bottom. So I have to place where it is up top. I don't want to dimension to, say, the endpoint of the wall and then to the endpoint of here, because now my dimension sticks inside of my actual wall. I want this endpoint to be referenced at the exterior side of my wall. So when I place it, I start my dimension, I continue from this line, not to this endpoint. I wait, hover, and move up to where I get my extension to the outer side of the wall. Then escape or enter twice. Again, we'll dimension from endpoint to endpoint at this new height, and don't forget to get rid of those reference lines. This B now needs to be moved to the left by 8 inches, so it's not being covered up by our dimension line extension. We have a few more dimensions that we need to place in on our exterior. This one here will be to the top side of this wall. If you remember when we drew it, we offset to the top side. Again, not at the endpoint, but over to the extension where it touches. And we'll continue. My command is not liking me. Dimension continue. We'll place it to the endpoint. And lastly, we'll go from endpoint to endpoint of the entire wall. To place these ones, or not to place these ones, to get rid of our reference lines, a blue fence just going around our architectural ticks selects those 2 reference lines. Go ahead and delete them and save your drawing. We'll continue on with the interior closet next.